On March 13, 1964, at 2:30 a.m., a woman named Kitty Genovese was returning home from work. As she arrived outside her apartment, a man approached her with a knife. She was stabbed, raped, and killed. The murder itself is not what made this event noteworthy. It's known for the number of witnesses who heard the attack but did not call the police or intervene. When the story reached the media, it put the case in the national spotlight and led to the recognition of a psychological phenomenon. Learn about the murder of Kitty Genovese and the insight the case provided into human psychology on this episode of Everything Everywhere Daily. This episode is sponsored by Fiji Water. You've probably heard of Fiji Water and have seen it in stores. Well, Fiji Water really is from the islands of Fiji. Drop by drop, Fiji water is filtered through volcanic rock, 1,600 miles away from the nearest continent and all its pollution, protected and preserved naturally from external elements. In this process, it collects a unique profile of electrolytes and minerals, resulting in more than double the electrolytes as the other top two premium bottled water brands, giving Fiji water its smooth taste. Fiji water's electrolytes are 100% natural, and this water even has a perfectly balanced pH of 7.7. I've recently been trying to reduce my consumption of diet soda, and I found Fiji water to be a great alternative. Visit your local retailer to pick up some Fiji water today for your next backyard party, beach day, hike, or even your home office. Fiji water is Earth's finest water. This episode is sponsored by Mint Mobile. There are numerous subscriptions that you pay for every month. If you want to reduce your monthly spending, your only option is usually to cancel and go without. But in case of your phone, you can significantly reduce your costs while still enjoying almost the exact same service by switching to Mint Mobile. With plans starting at just $15 a month, Mint Mobile gives you premium wireless service on the nation's largest 5G network. With Mint Mobile, you can use your same phone, phone number, contact list, and even connect to the exact same towers and cellular network. The only difference is price. And that's why I recommend Mint Mobile. This year, skip breaking a sweat and breaking the bank. Get your summer savings and shop premium wireless plans at mintmobile.com/EED. That's mintmobile.com/EED. Upfront payment of $45 required, equivalent to $15 a month. Limited time new customer offer for first 3 months only. Speeds may slow above 35 gigabytes on unlimited plan. Taxes and fees extra. See Mint Mobile for details. Catherine Kitty Genovese was just 28 years old when she was murdered outside of her apartment in Queens, New York. As a bar manager, Genovese was best known for being a chatterbox with lots of energy and a zest for life. Before she was murdered, she had been saving up to open an Italian restaurant. Genovese lived with her girlfriend, Mary Ann Zelenko, in a second-floor apartment in Kew Gardens, Queens, in one of 14 similar units in the building. On the evening in question, March 13, 1964, as she was making her way home, she was approached by a man and stabbed. She reportedly called out, quote, "Oh my God, he stabbed me, please help me." But no one came. As she was about to get stabbed again, someone did notice. A neighbor, Robert Mosier, called out from above, quote, "Leave that girl alone." Still, he did not leave his apartment, nor did he call the police. Mosier did manage to scare off Genovese's attacker for a few minutes. The man reportedly ran down a nearby alley and sat in his car, preparing to drive away from the crime scene. However, the nearby apartment building lights soon went off, prompting the man to return. During these few minutes, Genovese attempted to crawl away, ending up behind her building. Her attacker came back and found her, now out of sight, and he robbed, stabbed, and raped her. One of Genovese's neighbors, Sophia Farrar, eventually found her, finding Genovese in a pool of blood and calling for neighbors to help. This led to another neighbor, Greta Schwartz, calling the police as Farrar waited with Genovese's body. Kitty Genovese would die soon afterwards in the ambulance, taking her to the hospital. Genovese's girlfriend was told the devastating news later that morning at 4 a.m. New York City police detective Michael Sang was assigned to lead the investigation. The police questioning was initially centered on Zelenko. The questions focused on the two's relationship, asking about their sexuality rather than the case. And initially, Zelenko was considered a suspect. One of their neighbors, Carl Ross, was also questioned. When the police arrived to formally interrogate Zelenko, they found Ross with her, both of them drinking. As Genovese's body was found outside of his apartment building, coupled with the fact that he was arrested for disorderly conduct during questioning, he was also considered to be a suspect. Fortunately, the investigation didn't go much further, as the police found the murderer. Later that week, a suspected robbery occurred. When investigating the suspect's car, they found stolen appliances and arrested him. The man's name was Winston Mosley. Mosley was suspected due to his car. Witnesses to Genovese's murder reported seeing a white car. Mosley, having driven a white Corvair, was asked about the murder but remained silent. However, Mosley's hands told a different story. They were covered in scabs. The detectives accused him of the murder, and Mosley's reply was damaging. He both admitted to the murder and gave information about the crime that was never released to the public, confirming he was the killer. According to Mosley, he had spotted Genovese on her way home and followed her. He had gone out that night specifically looking for a victim, but never explained why. During his interrogation, he also confessed to 2 other rapes and murders. This resulted in him being sentenced to death, which was later reduced to life in prison. As tragic as the murder of Kitty Genovese was, the murder itself was not the reason why the case became well known. The case is notorious due to the supposed number of witnesses to the crime. The murder was initially reported by the New York Times in an article on March 27th titled, "37 People Who Saw Murder Didn't Call the Police." The article stated that multiple neighbors saw or heard the crime take place and did nothing. And later it was reported that there were 38 witnesses. Due to this shockingly large number, the case quickly garnered national and international attention. If you have ever heard of Kitty Genovese and of her murder, this is the story that you are probably familiar with. However, the Times article contained many factual errors, most of which are still commonly believed today. For starters, the number of witnesses reported by the New York Times originated from a conversation with the police commissioner and the New York Times editor. However, the number that he provided was exaggerated, and it was never fact-checked. The reality of the attack was as follows. No one saw her murder completely as it was implied. Those who saw the start of the attack thought it was a drunken brawl or a lover's quarrel. None of the neighbors saw the stabbing, though they did see some sort of violent action. Additionally, multiple neighbors claim that they did call the police, although this may have been after the stabbing had already occurred. Finally, the second stabbing, the one that actually killed Kitty Genovese, was in a different, more private area than the first attack, away from the original witnesses. Public attitudes regarding the case were extremely negative, with the perception of New York City and the people who lived in large cities being callous and having no empathy. Regardless of the actual facts, the story of Kitty Genovese's murder became well known in the public's collective memory and became an inspiration for the study of a psychological phenomenon known as the bystander effect. Even though the number of witnesses in the case was at first exaggerated, the bystander effect is still relevant because the testimony of the neighbors reported a common theme. They didn't want to get involved. So, what is the bystander effect and how does it work? Initially dubbed Genovese syndrome, the bystander effect is the attempt to psychologically explain why witnesses wouldn't help a victim when a crime was being committed. This effect has been documented through multiple experiments, with the most notable being conducted by psychologists John Darley and Bibi Latane in 1968. To summarize the experiment, the general setup involved creating an emergency situation within a laboratory setting. Participants of the experiment would be taken to a cubicle with an intercom, with the number of participants varying each time. The goal of the experiment was to determine which variables influence people's reactions in an emergency. The dependent variable would be the number of people involved in the bystander position, with the numbers varying from being on your own to having 5 or more people. The participants would then be asked about their problems in college. The experiment would have one participant mention that they have had trouble with seizures early on in the questioning. And after a few rounds in, the same participant would then fake having a seizure. Their study was to see how long it would take for the participant to get help for the seizure victim. The study found that you're much more likely to get help when you're on your own in the experiment. If there were others involved, the percentage of people who would ask for help would drop significantly, going from 100% when you were by yourself to 62% in a group larger than 5 people. The time waiting to get help also increased drastically. This is referred to as pluralistic ignorance, which essentially means that we have the tendency to rely on other people's actions and reactions when deciding how we want to act. And this means that you are psychologically inclined to see something and think, oh, this is someone else's problem. However, if everyone thinks that way, no one reacts, leaving the problem to become potentially worse. This is also part of what is known as diffusion of responsibility, meaning that as a group is larger, the personal responsibility of any one person decreases, separating the victim from the bystander. If no one were to react, you now become far more likely to point back to the situation and say, see, no one else acted either, clearing yourself internally of any blame. You're also more likely to look towards others to define the situation. If everyone else doesn't think it's an emergency, then you are less likely to as well. Additionally, the self-help reflection given after the experiment saw that many people focused on how the situation impacted them rather than the victim. So to sum it up, in an individual situation as the sole bystander, you are more likely to become involved as there is more pressure on you to act, as you can't push responsibility or blame onto anyone but yourself. But when others are present, rationalizing your own inaction becomes much easier. Many people have a desire to help others, driven by both social norms and basic human empathy. However, there is also a desire to avoid a situation that would cause embarrassment, future involvement, or any immediate harm. Latane and Darley found that there's a 5-step model in which bystanders decide whether or not to help. The steps are as follows. Step 1, you notice the event. Step 2, you decide whether or not the situation is an emergency. If you see others not reacting to the situation, people typically assume it is not an emergency. Step 3, you either assume responsibility or think that someone else will assume responsibility. Step 4, you either know how to react or do not have the skills to help. And step 5, based on the information stated, you decide whether or not to help or opt out due to worries about the consequences. There was actually another well-known experiment on the bystander effect that was also done by Latane and Darley. Known as the smoky room experiment, it was specifically designed to test the diffusion of responsibility. In the experiment, participants were divided into groups of various sizes and brought into a room, where they were asked to complete a questionnaire on urban life and the pressures associated with living in such environments. As the subjects were filling out the questionnaire, smoke filled the room. And I say smoke, but it was actually just steam. When left alone, 75% of the subjects took action in response to the smoke in the room before finishing the questionnaire. However, in groups of 3, 62% finished filling out the questionnaire before taking action. When questioned, the subjects stated that they were worried about appearing anxious to others and were looking to see if anyone else was reacting. However, because the others were feeling the same way and also trying to look calm, they believed that they were overreacting to the smoke and deemed the situation safe. The experiment confirmed the earlier findings of diffusion of responsibility and pluralistic ignorance. Despite being in a perceived emergency, the participants were willing to ignore a potentially life-threatening situation to avoid embarrassment. So what do all these psychological studies have to say about the Kitty Genovese case? Despite the inaccuracies in the initial article published by the New York Times, it suggests that because many people witnessed at least some of the incident, no one took responsibility, called for help, or defended Kitty. They all thought that somebody else would do it. Kitty's murder did lead to changes in the emergency response systems. Her murder is often cited as one of the main reasons 911 is used as an emergency response number in the United States. The murder of Kitty Genovese has had a massive impact on our understanding of human psychology. Although many of the details surrounding the case have been proven false, the bystander effect is a real phenomenon. Though Kitty's murder was a senseless tragedy, it opened the door to a better understanding of human psychology and what makes us act and what makes us stand idly by. The executive producer of Everything Everywhere Daily is Charles Daniel. The associate producers are Austin Otkin and Cameron Kiefer. Research and writing for this episode were provided by Olivia Ash. Today's review comes from listener Canadian Canada over on Apple Podcasts in, surprisingly, Canada. They write, "Fantastic. This podcast is so fantastic. I have learned about so much stuff from turf to rockets. This is most definitely the best podcast I've ever listened to." Well, thanks, Canadian. I'm glad you enjoy the show, and I'm always glad to see the Great White North representing. And so long as you keep listening, I'll keep making episodes. Remember, if you leave a review or send me a boostagram, you too can have it read on the show.